Welcome back again. This is the start of the second series of this tutorial. And we're going to quickly recap what we made so far, which is a terrain with selected biomes. If you're starting this tutorial right here, you can use the cache that should be provided. Otherwise, if you started from the first part of the tutorial, there is one small addition that you can make to follow the tutorial in the same way, which is adding one more biome to the CSV file, which we will again save into including water. Yes, keep current format. Yeah, for the people who are joining in the middle, let me explain quickly what we did in the last part. So we used the CSV file to actually generate these biomes as an external file. So now I'm going to update the input file here too. As a matter of fact, I probably should have made this file path a file path, so we can use this selector. Okay. Now it should recook. Okay, so now we have a new biome for the water. So if we go quickly back to the CSV file, the water body biome is enabled when the water value in the CSV file is the water attribute is higher than 0.25. And this is one of the free attributes that we got during the terrain generation from the height field erode node. So if you middle mouse button click here, you can actually see the water float. Okay, so let's save the cache again. Okay, so yeah, you can either update the CSV file or just use the cache file as it is. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so in this first part of the tutorial, or the first part of the second part, if you will, we're going to add some water bodies to our terrain. Yes, that's actually one other thing that I probably should do. It's actually not apply the color to the terrain, so we can still have the old color. And actually save again to disk. And this is the cache that you should have when you start the tutorial from here. Okay. So in theory, we could just go back to a more straightforward method of just promoting our water attribute from point to primitive, and then make a group out of it using a group expression node. Also going to again hide the origin gnomon, no longer in the way. So for water mesh, we're going to say if our water attribute is higher than 0. So that generates this mesh. And because it's quite noisy right now, one thing you could do is use a group promote. Go ahead. There we go. And actually use 2 promotions and go from primitive to point, and then go from point back to primitive. So now you can actually see that we grew the group, and that reduces the amount of noise in the selection a little bit, at least. But instead, an alternative would be to directly group it as points. So if we just copy paste this node, it shouldn't do anything, because right now it's set to a primitive group and it tries to load the water attribute as primitive. So we need to set it to points, and then we actually have a group. Then we can add a group node and copy paste the name, set the group type to points, and initial merge should be union with existing. Then disable the base group, because otherwise it will just group everything, which is not what we want in this case. And then we can say include by edges and use edge depth. And then copy the same group again. And now we can dynamically control how far we grow the group. And if we then actually do another promote again, water mesh from points to primitives, or we can actually say only this if we want to be more strict with our grouping. Set it to 2, and then we could say remove everything that's not in the water mesh. Okay, so now we actually have a group of the mesh that is pretty close to where our water is right now. But because we actually built our biome system in the last part of this tutorial, I was actually intending on using that for this purpose as well. And I will demonstrate that, of course. So let me add a color node again. And set it to random from attributes underscore biome index. There we go again. We made a biome index and a biome name. In this case, I'm actually going to use a group expression. And instead of using the water, I'm going to say biome name equals water body. I said that correctly. Yeah, so basically the same name as specified here. And ideally, that should work. In this case, I can actually say, okay, there we go. Did I give it a? Yes. Okay. Remember, everything in Houdini is case sensitive by default. Some things are not, but usually expect them to be case sensitive. So there we go. Now we actually have a filtered group of our water, which is like all the shapes that actually have been processed to be less noisy and more blob-like. And this actually pretty well conforms to the lake shapes that we will have in our terrain. So now we're actually going to create a mesh out of this. So I'm actually going to copy paste these nodes to actually have this mesh. Go. But in this case, actually, I want this group to be a different name. So we can actually say that we can expand the group initially, but we still have the old group in memory. So if we click here, we can see, especially before we promote it, we can see that water mesh is 31,600, and this one is 41,500 points. Okay. So one thing we want to do now, actually also fix our view plane, which we can do here. That is to neither just decrease the minimum range so we can zoom in more closely to the mesh without the camera clipping. And in this case, now I want to have the outside. So I want to get the difference between both groups. So I'm just going to use a group combine for this. And I'm going to say water mesh extended. Oh yes, okay. And in this case, I actually also want to promote the other group. Points to primitives. Okay. Now we can have this group and subtract the other group from it. So now we actually have the edge that we think we want to make the edge a little bit bigger. And do that by disabling that again. Yes, that should be right. And now we actually want to put them back to point groups. So just going to copy paste this group and actually reverse this. Points from primitives to points. No, primitives to points. And now I'm going to actually store the current elevation in an attribute. So f elevation equals v at sign p dot y, so the y position. And now we can actually smooth the elevation. Like you can also decide to smooth the mesh itself, but if you do that, the horizontal position might also change. And in our case, we only want to smooth the position in y. So an effective way to do that is to actually make a new attribute and smooth that instead. So if we now smooth the elevation, you don't really see any effect. Quickly that. Yes. So now we can actually say restore the height using the elevation. So yeah, so now we can actually smooth our water mesh. In our case, we actually want to do this smoothing in 2 steps because we want the extension of the group. We actually do not want to affect what's in the middle. So I'm going to constrain those points. And now if I smooth it, you can see that only the middle part is going to update. It's going to be as extreme as I can. And after that, I'm actually going to do another smooth. Smooth the opposite. So you can just say not that group. So now if I disable these two nodes, you have that. But there's actually one thing that we want to check, and that is when to make sure that it uses the minimum height of these two, because otherwise you might have water that goes to intersect, that will go outside of the original water position and go on top of your terrain instead of going nicely with it. So I'm going to fetch the other height. Save elevation equals v up input 1 underscore elevation. So this will fetch from the same point number this attribute from the second input. So for comparison, from the original input, that would be, but this is basically the same, f, sorry, but for the other inputs. So now we can say elevation equals the minimum of the save elevation and the current elevation, and use that. So now you can actually see some stuff actually going down a little bit. Okay. And then just to make sure that we actually still have some smoothing of the intersection between the two. Going to smooth again. And actually just apply it as we had it before. Just like that. Just to get rid of those tiny things. Okay. So let me add a facet node. Set it to post compute normals. I'm going to add a color node. Set it to point color. And in this case, I'm actually going to use the color picker. I'm going to go back to facet 1 and actually use the picker and just go over the water here and use that as a color. Okay, let's quickly save. And now if I would merge this back with the original, yes. Now we actually have a water mesh that doesn't really have nice borders just yet, but at least goes over the bottom of the water. So yeah, if it's a concave shape, the water will actually go over it because we made a very aggressive smooth on it. Okay. And let's actually save this in the cache. Wait, I'm just going to copy this one. Because I want to keep the same naming convention. And this is going to be cache water mesh. And let's save over this. There we go. Okay, but instead of actually moving that down, I'm actually, yes, that's one thing I forgot. Okay, but yeah, right now we actually have the heights curling up at the top or at the edges. And in our case, we want to use just these points to constrain it, but actually do not want to use the borders itself. And then we can say none here. And also none here. Oh wait, that's just because it's, yeah, there we go. And this is actually the main reason why we want to use elevation instead of position smoothing. Because if we would smooth the position, if we don't constrain the boundaries, it would move inwards. And we want to maintain the borders where they are. And in this case, we can actually keep the group boundary just as it is. Okay. So yeah, now our water is intersecting already a little bit nicer with the terrain, but we're going to fix the edges in the next part. Not by actually removing the edges, but by actually making sure that the terrain goes up a little bit to make sure that we have the proper intersection with the water. So I'm going to overwrite the cache. Okay, and that concludes this part. In the next part, we will slightly update the terrain to flow better together with the water. Hope to see you there.